Hello everyone and welcome to today's National CAD Standard Educational Webinar. I am Rob Holson, Manager of Technical Programs here at CSI, and I will be moderating today's webinar session. Today's program is titled CAD Layers, Why Do We Need Them? Today's program will be presented by Steven Spangler. Steven graduated from Virginia Tech with a mechanical engineering degree. He worked for NAVFAC ENGCOM for 2 years. Then in 1992 went to work at the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers CAD BIM Technology Center in Vicksburg, Mississippi. He has been involved with the United States National CAD Standard since version 1.0, serving on both the NCS Steering Committee and various other committees. Steven is also the author of the United States Army Corps of Engineers AEC CAD Standard and AEC Graphic Standard documents, both of which are based on the NCS at additional Department of Defense requirements. He is a big Star Trek, Star Wars fan and enjoys collecting autographs and attending science fiction conventions. His goal in life is to prove to his daughters that he does not spend his whole day at work playing video games and surfing the internet.
All right, good afternoon. Again, I'm Steven Spangler with the CAD BIM Technology Center. Like Rob said, I've been involved in developing both the National CAD Standard and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Standard since 1992. So there's a lot that I've seen regarding layers and how they're developed. The three things I'm going to focus on today in this presentation are, what is a layer? And then next, what is the breakdown of a layer name as you would find it in the National CAD Standard? And then the last thing I'm going to address before I go into any questions that may be out there are some recurring questions that I see a lot in the years that I've been working on a standard. Okay, I guess the first thing is, well, what is a layer? And I know way back years ago when I was doing some projects, I would get an AutoCAD or a MicroStation file and I would open it up and just everything in the drawing was white and it was on one layer. So you really couldn't do much with the file as it was. So what I would have to do is go through and break out the items that were in the drawing into layers. So the first thing to talk about here is, well, what is a layer? If you think back when I always thought this was cool, when I'd go to the library when I was in high school, and this is probably going to date me, when we do research and look in encyclopedias, I always thought that those encyclopedia overlays of the human body, I thought those were really cool. They had one on the human body, and then they also had one usually of a frog. And what it was, you'd have each body system on a separate celluloid overlay. Like you'd have the circulatory system on one overlay, you'd have the respiratory system on another overlay. So you could look at one page or one overlay and see how that individual system functioned and what the individual items were in it. But then you could also lay each overlay on top of each other, and that way you could see how all the organs fit into the body and then how all the things were laid out so that they function together. And I just thought that was really neat when I was a teenager looking at that. But if you think about it, a building is very similar to a human body. It has a respiration system, which would be your HVAC system. It has a circulatory system, which would be your plumbing system, which pipes the water and other things through it. It has a skeletal system, which is the structural part. You have your joists, you have your columns, you have your girders. And then finally, the body has things like skin and all the facades and all that the architects or possibly the interior designers developed. So if you look at it that way, think about comparing the old overlays in the encyclopedia to a building. layers are a great way to break out building site information, because in this image here, like I said before, let's say you got this drawing from as a deliverable for a building that was being developed. I would hate to get this and everything in this be on one layer. It's a mess to try and weed through and try and figure out what you're looking at. You want to be able to turn things on and off. And if you do break things out into multiple layers, you can break out these items into their separate systems, just like I talked about how a building can be broken out into different systems. So then you can turn layers on and off to not only look at different systems, but you can focus in on exactly what you want to look at. If you want to look at all the walls in a building, you can just turn on the walls layer. If you want to look at all the ductwork in a building, you can just turn on the ductwork layers. It's just a great way to break out information so that you're not looking at it all at once. So how does the National CAD Standard break down a layer name? Well, this is a sample layer name if you used everything that you could possibly use in a layer name. And this is up to a 19-character layer name. So let's drill down into each one. First, you start off with a discipline designator level 1. And the NCS defines a discipline designator. It says it denotes the category of subject matter contained on the specific layer. Now note, it did not say it denotes the discipline. It says the subject matter, because while discipline designators do cover things like A for architectural, E for electrical, M for mechanical, G for geotechnical, there's also some other items that you can break layers out into, such as Q for equipment, R for resource, and a lot of times I get asked, well, what would you put on a resource layer? We break out resource things. You could have things like real estate drawings, which are not covered by a discipline designator. There's also like Z for contractor shop drawings, which that really isn't a discipline, but it's a category of subject matter. Now, level 1 discipline designators are strictly one character followed by a hyphen. So in this case, you have the architectural discipline designator followed by a hyphen. If it was mechanical, it would be M followed by a hyphen, or electrical would be E followed by a hyphen. Now, is this mandatory? Yes. You do have to use this character when creating a layer name. So now, what is a discipline designator level 2? The level 2 discipline designator further defines the discipline designator. In this case, if you use AE, the E would stand for elements, so it'd be architectural elements. There's also AD for architectural demolition, AF for architectural finishes, AI for architectural interiors. Now, when would you might want to break this out into a level 2 discipline designator? Say you have a lot of layers for the architectural discipline, just hundreds of layers. You might want to, in order to have these layers grouped together, you might want to think about using a level 2 discipline designator. Is it mandatory to use a level 2 discipline designator? No, you do not have to use them. Now I have these recommendations here. These are just things I'm going to recommend. You don't have to follow them. You can take it with a pinch of salt. But I would suggest using file naming to further differentiate within your disciplines if you want to break out into level 2 discipline designators, because adding an additional character to layer names really isn't required, and it could cause confusion when you're delivering these layers to someone else. But again, if you find yourself you're having to create hundreds and hundreds of layers within one particular discipline, you might want to consider using level 2 discipline designators. All right, the next thing in a layer name is the major group. Now, the major group identifies a major building system. For instance, in this case, we have wall, which would be the walls. You would have door for doors, HVAC for HVAC, POWR for power, SIT for site, and ROAD for road. Now, the major group, again, is always 4 characters, and all 4 characters have to be used. Now, if you're not able to fill up the major group with 4 characters, the NCS recommends that you fill it with the tilde character. Is this mandatory? Yes. So you do have to use level 1 discipline designators, and you do have to use major groups. Now the next thing is minor groups. And minor groups further define your major groups. So in the above example, we have full, which represents full height, and EXTR, which represents exterior. So in this case, this would be an architectural full height exterior wall. Again, these are always 4 characters, and again, all 4 characters have to be used. So if you don't use all of the characters within the minor group, you have to fill it with the tilde character. Now, let's say you only want to stop, in this case, at a wall full. You do not have to use the second minor group. If you use the first minor group, you do not have to use the second minor group. Now, you cannot do a wall tilde 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 dash EXTR. You do have to stop, you do have to fill the first minor group if you do choose to use minor groups. Again, mandatory, minor groups are not mandatory. You could stop always with A-wall or AE-wall. It's really up to you. Now the last thing, last character in a layer name is the status or phase of your layer. Now this breaks out your layers according to the status of the work or construction phase. For instance, D would mean it's the demolition, F means it's future work, E means it's existing to remain, M means it's items to be moved, N means it's new work, T means it's temporary work, and X means it's not in this contract. This is always 1 character. Is it mandatory? No. Now, one thing I do recommend, I would use these very sparingly. The thing is, think about it. If you add status to your layers, that means you're going to increase the number of layers per drawing. So like in this case, we have an A wall full exterior. Let's say we add the status phase for if it's to be demolished, if it's existing, if it's new work. That already creates 3 layers just covering A wall full exterior. So if you have 10 layers for walls in your drawing, you could have potentially 30 layers to do this, to cover all these different types of walls. So what I would recommend is maybe use a line type or a line weight to differentiate the status of these items in your drawings. So really I would really recommend using these layers, the status code sparingly. So where can you find the discipline designator, major group, minor group, and status list? Well, if you subscribe to the National CAD Standard, there's a section in there called the AIA CAD Layer Guidelines. And in Section 4, Appendix A, there are tables of all the discipline designators, all the major groups, all the minor groups, and status codes. So in this case, I took a screenshot of just the beginning of the major group section. You can see they're in alphabetical order, and they have, in this case, like ACCS is access, acid means it's an acid waste system. The ones that are in a different color, and I guess an orangish color, these are ones that were just added for the National CAD Standard version 6. Now also, if you drill down further, there are sample layer lists in another section of the AIA CAD Layer Guidelines. And what I did here was I took another screenshot These are all the layers that are sample layers for walls. So you see you could have a cavity wall layer, you could have a layer to cover the center line, curtain walls, fire protection walls, and so on. So there's all different types of wall layers that you could use if you so desire. Now, one thing I get a lot of questions about are all the layers that are in the National CAD Standard, are they mandatory? The layers that are presented in this list of layers, these are commonly used layers. These are ones you would probably see most of the time, or you might want to use in a project. But do you have to use them? No. All right, so I guess in summary, looking back at a layer name, what is mandatory versus what is optional? Again, the items in bold, the A and the hyphen and wall are mandatory for a layer name. You have to use up at least 6 characters in the layer name. And again, if you want to use the optional characters, you have up to 19 characters to add on to your layer names. So now what about things that are not like physical parts of a drawing or a site? What about things like text and dimensions? So what you would do is place things that do not represent physical aspects of a structure. Those would go on what's called the annotation major group levels. So what you can do is create layers that cover things like dimensions, which would be dims, text, title blocks and borders, TTLB, and revisions, REVS. So what you would do is create layers like if you're creating dimensions for an architectural sheet, you would create a layer called A-Anno-Dims or AE-Anno-Dims if you were using level 2 discipline designators. Now, you could also create layers like A-Anno-Pat for patterns, A-Anno-text for text, and so on. There's like, I think 16 or so different minor groups you can add on to the annotation major group level. Is this mandatory? Yes. Chances are I can't think of a single project where you wouldn't add text or dimension or patterning to a drawing, so you would be creating these types of layers. But again, these go specifically on the Anno layers. So now, what sort of recurring questions have I faced throughout the years dealing with layers? Now, one question I get asked a lot, well, what layers in the NCS do I have to use? Now I hope a lot of you have eaten because I'm going to use a lot of comparisons to restaurants. Now, just like going to Burger King, you can have it your way with the NCS. You can use as many layers or as few layers in the National CAD Standard as you want. It really depends on how detailed you want to sort out your building site components. It's really up to you. Now, one thing again you have to keep in mind, the more layers you use, the harder it is to find the particular layer you're looking for in a drawing. So if someone gives you a drawing and they put 1,000 layers in this one file, you're going to have to sort through all those layers to try and find what you're looking for. So keep that in mind. Or another way to look at it, I thought this was pretty timely. McDonald's just came out with 3 different versions of the Big Mac. So say you wanted a real small drawing, you had a small drawing, you only needed a few layers in it. You might just want the Mac Junior equivalent of what you can get in McDonald's. Now, if you have a lot of layers, you're adding more into it, you might want to go for a Big Mac. Now, if you have a lot of layers, just hundreds of layers in a drawing, then you're going for the Grand Mac. But again, keep in mind, you've got to weed through finding things. You got to weed through all your layer lists to try and find out where things are. Now, I get this question a lot. Can I create my own layers? Now, going back to the burger analogy, there's a restaurant called Fuddruckers where you can build whatever type of burger you want. So it is with the National CAD Standard layers. Now, if you've been to Fuddruckers, what they do is you order the type of burger you want, and you get a plain burger. You get the bun and you get the meat. And then what they have is a condiments bar where you can put lettuce, you can put tomatoes, you can put pickles, onions, jalapenos if you want, you can put ketchup, mustard, whatever. So you can basically build your own burger from it. So the same thing with the National CAD Standard. You can build whatever layer list you want. And if they don't cover something in the National CAD Standard, you can build your own layers. So if, for instance, this is silly, but let's say I needed a layer to cover burgers. Now, obviously, there isn't going to be a layer for that in the National CAD Standard. So what I could do is create a major group called BURG or BRGR, and that could cover burgers. And so you can develop your own major and minor groups. However, the rule is you're not allowed to use an already existing National CAD Standard major or minor group. So if you are going to create a new major or minor group, you need to go and check in the list of the major groups and minor groups in the National CAD Standard and make sure it hasn't been used. And again, like I said before, they're alphabetical, so it's easy to check. And we come across this a lot in our work with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, because the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers does a lot of civil works type of work. Now, we wouldn't expect for things like levee design or locks and dams to be covered in the National CAD Standard, because that's not a typical thing most agencies draw. So we've had to go and create layers to cover those items. So in those cases, we did have to create our own major and minor groups. Now, one recommendation I do have, if you do have to create new layers, be sure to document them in some way. That way, those layers won't be a surprise to the recipient of whoever gets your CAD files. So let's say someone has given you a project and they've said, in the contract language, it says, I want you to follow the National CAD Standard. And when you're developing these drawings, you realize, oh, I need a layer for a particular item that's not covered in the National CAD Standard. So you would create a major group or a minor group and then put that in your drawing. Now, what's going to happen if that person runs some sort of checker and they have all the National CAD Standard layers programmed into this? Immediately that layer is going to be flagged and they're going to say, hey, you're non-compliant. And they're going to throw the drawings back at you and say, please explain this. So a good thing to do is, if you do create new layers, be sure and document that somehow and provide that along with the drawings so it will not be a surprise to the recipient of those drawings. Okay, in the annotation layers, what is the difference between note and text? Now, this is a very good question. In fact, we had to address this recently in developing our latest version of the AC CAD standard. If you go to the National CAD Standard, anno-note is defined as notes, and anno-text is defined as text. Well, that really doesn't help me out much. So one thing that we did in developing our standard, since these are both technically text in a drawing, we usually put standalone text in a drawing, not including the title block text. We put that on anno-text. Now, text in a list of notes, like say a general notes list of notes, or text with leader lines associated to the drawing, we put those on anno-note. But again, the National CAD Standard is not specific about that. So you could follow what I recommend, or if your company has another policy in place, you can go with that. So now, what about going from BIM to CAD? This is a hot topic right now. And in fact, a lot of the questions that were submitted early, about half of these asked about this. Now, the thing is, The focus now is shifting away from CAD deliverables to BIM deliverables. So in a lot of contract language, and the Corps of Engineers is no exception, we require BIM models as a deliverable in our contract language. But there's still customers out there that all they care about are the CAD drawings, or they may have, say, I want BIM deliverables, but yet when you deliver the BIM model, they say, hey, I want the CAD drawings. That's what I want to see. They're still focused in a 2D method of looking at drawing files. So the problem is, the more layers you have in a CAD standard, the harder it is to do a 100% translation from BIM to CAD. And the reason is, BIM is focused on putting objects together, and it's focused on the data behind the object. It really doesn't care what layer an object is drawn on. It just wants to know, what am I and what are my properties? But now CAD drawings, they're 2D graphics that you do have to break out into layers. So the problem that people are finding is that they're spending more time trying to translate from BIM to CAD and making sure everything's on the correct layers and according to a standard than they are in creating the BIM models, because they're having to break these objects down into so many different layers. So in version 6, which was the version that was released a few months ago, we began to address this question. And I'm going to just read this from there. They say, for BIM use, the required level 1 discipline designator and major group can and should be employed, whereas the optional level 2 discipline designator, minor and status groups, need not be implemented. It is technically problematic to achieve. So what they're saying is, if you were translating, say, a door object from BIM to CAD, you could potentially stop at A-door for the layer name. So you wouldn't have to worry about breaking out everything else within the door graphics into other layers. So what I would say is, I agree that this is a step in the right direction. Now, I could also argue that discipline designators are really unnecessary, since file naming takes care of this, because really the BIM object doesn't care who placed it. It doesn't care if an architect or a mechanical engineer or an electrical engineer placed it. It really becomes irrelevant. So you might not need a discipline designator in a layer name for when moving from BIM to CAD. So ultimately, it's really going to come down to a breaking of the CAD mindset when we go true 100% BIM. And we're going to have to focus on educating our customers on why BIM is important, why we can use BIM to do to cut the views that we need, that we typically would put out on a drawing sheet. So again, I'm really the NCS is starting to address this, but it's going to be a key thing when version 7 comes out. Because so I would say, in all the questions that were submitted about moving from BIM to CAD, I would say stay tuned, because there really isn't an NCS methodology beyond stopping at the first discipline designator and the major group. So I'm going to open up to any questions that might have been entered in while I was talking, but I know Rob is going to address any, I guess, housekeeping things before I get into the list.
Yes, indeed. Thank you, Stephen. Please note, any questions that are not addressed will be addressed with a follow-up one-on-one communication via email after the webinar is ended. And just as a reminder, if you have a question, please do type it into the questions toolbox on your user interface. And additionally, a copy of today's slides are available in the handouts section of that same user interface. If you would like to be involved with the NCS, we invite you to participate. Membership is open to all owners of the NCS. To get involved, go to the National CAD Standard website and click on the Get Involved tab. Additionally, for those participating in today's presentation, if you're interested in purchasing the National CAD Standard, there's an offer for a 10% off coupon code, I should say rather, that will be good through March 9th. That is also available on the slides, which will also be emailed to all attendees. So Stephen, back over to you for questions.
All right, I'm going to first address some of the questions that were submitted early. Kirsten submitted, are layers in CAD still relevant in an industry that is moving more towards BIM and 3D tools? And like I said before, really I think eventually layers are going to become obsolete when we move to true BIM deliverables. But again, stay tuned on things like that. Carrie asked, what are the best layer names for layers used in architectural elevations and details? In the National CAD Standard, there is a major group set up for details, sections, and elevations. Like you have DETL for details, SECT for sections, and ELEV for elevations. So what you can do is put those items on those layers. And I guess a follow-up, another question that's sort of tied into submitted by Carl is, why do we need layers for details? That's really up to the site or the preference of the user. I know in the Corps of Engineers, we have certain layers broken out for details. We have, say, A-detail GRPH, and this would cover all the graphic elements of a detail. We would have A-detail text to cover the text in the detail, A-detail dims for dimensions, and so on. What, again, to us, details are either on or off. Now, I know some people break out details based on the materials that are in them, like they have A-detail wood or A-detail steel. If you want to do that, that's fine. But personally, to me, details are either on or off. I really don't see a need for a lot of detail layers to be created. All right, someone, Devin sent in, say he had layers for his sanitary sewer versus his water layers in a civil set of drawings. And what he wants to do is have a drawing, but he wants to show both of these layers, both of these sets of layers in the same drawing, but he wants one of them to stand out in a drawing and one to sort of fade into the background so that he can be focused on one particular system when he prints it out. Really, the way I would do that is handling that through screening of those particular layers. And what I would do is look at, you might want to look at how either AutoCAD or MicroStation or whatever CAD package you're using, look into how they handle those types of things. Because what you can do is screen layers, and when you print those layers out, they will fade into the background, so they won't stand out the most in a drawing. All right, one person asked, up to how many layers can one use in a drawing since the colors are few, and can one color be used for 2 layers? As far as I know, I don't know what the limits are as far as layers, how many layers you can create for one drawing. I don't know, I never have reached the limit, but then again, like I said, you don't want to create too many, because then your drawing becomes too unwieldy when you deliver it to someone else. They talk about, can colors be used for more than 2 layers? Yes. Probably what the person is using is, I know AutoCAD, you had the problem of you could only use 1 color per layer, but now, just like MicroStation, you can use multiple colors per layers. And I guess going back to that question about how many layers can you have in a drawing, I know MicroStation years ago, they had a limit of 63 levels per drawing, but that requirement has been eliminated. So you, just like AutoCAD, you can create multiple layers within a drawing. Okay, another question is about, I'm interested in understanding licensing costs associated with the implementation of the National CAD Standard. That's a good question. Like Rob said, there's going to be a code at the end to get you a discount on subscribing to the National CAD Standard. It really depends on how many users you have at a site. If you have 1 or 2 people who are going to be using the National CAD Standard, I would recommend buying a single license of it. And you can buy either, it's based on what type of individual you are. Are you a student? Are you a member of the National CAD Standard? Or are you with the government or a college or whatever? And the fee for that ranges from $100 for a student license up to $290 for a member license. Then it gets into, do you want a site license? Are there 10 or few users at your site? And again, it's based on members up through students. So the cost for that ranges from $520 to $1,050. And then finally, they have an enterprise license, which is 10 or more users over a multiple office organization. And again, it's based on are you students, or are you members, or are you government or colleges? And that price ranges for $1,400 up to $2,800. And I know within the Corps of Engineers, we have offices spread out all over the U.S. and other countries. So what we did was I got the Corps of Engineers an enterprise license. So anyone within the Corps of Engineers can use that license to look at the National CAD Standard. So it's really money well spent. So those are the questions that were submitted early. I'm going to go through the ones that were submitted online. Jamel turned in one, is there a National CAD Standard for sheet numbering? This is really focused on layers, but yes, the National CAD Standard does address things like file naming, which gets into how you number your sheets and how the sheets are organized. Okay, is there any documentation that specifies standard line weights for National CAD Standard layers? Good question. The National CAD Standard does get into things like color tables, and it does address the different line weights that are available for users to use. Now the thing is, it does not specify if you have a wall full exterior that this is the particular line weight you have to use, that this is the particular color you have to use. And I agree with that. I don't think the National CAD Standard should get into specifics like that, because it should be left up to agencies or I guess organizations to come up with how they want their drawings to look. Now, be that in mind, when developing the U.S. AEC CAD standard, or the AEC CAD standard that's with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, we want our drawings to look a certain way, and we want so that we deliver a drawing to someone else that they're going to know what to expect. So in the case of our standard, we do follow the National CAD Standard layer conventions, but we do go that step further, and we say, hey, for this layer, we want it to be this color, and we want it to be this line weight, and we want it to be this line style. In fact, that's what our default is, and when we create our templates and software to use in implementing our standard, we do go that specific. So again, I agree with why the National CAD Standard did not specifically say you have to use particular line weights or line styles per layers, but if you're developing your own internal standard, yes, I would think you would have to do that. Okay, someone says they can't open the PDF. Can you email it to us? Rob would have to address that, but yes, they do have the emails of the people who are on this, so that could be emailed out. All right. Yes, Rob, did you have something to say?
Oh, no, I was just confirming that that's absolutely correct. We will be emailing that to all attendees.
Okay. Jim submitted Here's where we have our issues. We are civil and presently separate entities. Beyond this, we have hatch, text, dimension, symbols, and points separate into their own layers. What is the AIA National CAD Standard recommendation? That's fine, as long as the layers do not conflict with something that's already in the National CAD Standard and you have to build beyond what is in there, that's fine. I agree with you. U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, we have a lot of civil folks. We've had to create point layers. We've had to create layers for specific types of symbols. If they're not in the National CAD Standard, we've gone and created them. The only thing is we definitely follow the convention that's been set up in the National CAD Standard. Okay, Jim again asks, Anno puts all like objects together rather than placing with their major categories. Again, this is another thing where you could, it's I guess a personal preference. If you wanted, you could create an AWOL text layer or an AWOL dimensions layer. You can do that. It would comply with the National CAD Standard. There's nothing wrong with that. I know with the AEC CAD Standard, we group them all under the Anno layers just to eliminate all the different multiple types of layers that you would have to create. It just cuts down so much on the number of layers that you could potentially have in a drawing. All right, let's see. Patricia said, what standard, I guess, is used or followed in Canada? I guess it really depends on what your contract language states that you have to use. I know in the Corps of Engineers contract language, it says to follow the AEC CAD standard, and if there's something that isn't in that, you follow the National CAD Standard. I've seen a lot of contract language put out that says you have to follow the National CAD Standard. So I guess it really depends on what your contract language dictates. And if you're not sure, go to whoever the BIM or CAD manager or project manager at the customer side is. Jim asks, I guess, use the major as desired and use the minor for the DIMs. Yes, if you were going to add DIMs as a minor group, it would follow the major group. Okay, let's see. Scrolling down. Okay, someone asked what is the most commonly used DIM software. Again, this is addressing layers in CAD, so I'm not going to get into that. Randy asked, what do you mean by file naming? That's really how do you name your CAD drawings in AutoCAD or MicroStation or whatever CAD package you follow. And the National CAD Standard is really good about giving a means for file naming, and our standard does follow that. How do you use the file name for level 2? An example, please. Tracy asked that. What I'm saying there is, if you had a really extensive project that you just had lots of layers, what I would recommend is maybe putting, again, this topic does not address file naming. That would probably be a good follow-up session for this. What you would do is create a layer name. In this case, again, it follows discipline, level 1 and level 2 discipline designators. So you could create a file name beginning with AE. And then what I would do is have your regular layer names within that drawing file. And you wouldn't have to break out your layer names as well into AEs or ADs or whatever. Your file name would control that. And when you reference in the drawings together, you would be able to sort based on, you could just look at the file name and determine which layers you want to look at. Will you be adding standard line types to the National CAD Standard? Josh asked this. Again, stuff like line types, line weights, symbols, schedules, all these types of things are covered in the National CAD Standard. So you're not just getting a layer naming standard in the National CAD Standard. It covers all sorts of things. It talks to you about how to create drawings, the method for creating drawings, and how they should look in CAD. So again, to me, the NCS is a great bargain because it covers not just layers, but so many different types of things. Okay, Devin asked the question, a door should have a line weight of 0.35 millimeters, where a wall should have a line weight of 0.7 millimeters. Again, that's really going to be up to the agency or whatever standard you're dictated to follow. So, like if you were a customer for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and you received our AEC CAD standard, it would tell you exactly what the default line weight, line type for a layer should be. But again, if you get a contract and it says follow the NCS, and that's all it says, it would probably be a good idea for you to go back to the customer and ask them, hey, do you have your own internal standard that breaks out further exactly what line weights or what line colors? Or you could say, here is what I recommend for those. Okay, with BIM models and layers, have you considered the level of detail field and layer names? Again, that's something we're really looking into now, and so again, I would say stay tuned for that. How about line, okay, Ricardo asked, how about line thicknesses based on layers for details and sections? Again, it's really going to come down to the individual. There are minor groups set up in the National CAD Standard based on weights. I believe it's like LW10, LW25, LW35 based on the millimeter line weights of the lines. And that's really up to your organization whether you want to follow that. We don't follow that because really the software can handle, you can have multiple line weights and multiple line colors on individual layers. But it's really up to the individual. What's the difference between AD, discipline designator, architectural demolition, and the D phase, existing to demolish? That's a good question. That really runs into a case of, do you want to break out your layer names to a really detailed point, or would you rather just cover these items by using a file name or even a layer name? Because you could just put all your demolition items on an AD file name, and then you don't have to add your status phase code at the end. Or you could have an architectural drawing that has just A dash in the file name, and then you could add the status phase code at the end of every layer name. It really depends on how complex you want to make your list of layer names. Okay, Eric asks, can we submit major and minor layer designations for adoption in future versions of the NCS? I'm so glad you asked that. Yes, you can. In fact, what I would recommend is becoming a member, and I'm going to show a slide right at the end in just a couple minutes on how you can become a member of the National CAD Standard. And what I would recommend, if you do have, if you can think of some way to do this better, we want to know. If you have a major group or a minor group that you want added because you think this is something the majority of most people would use, definitely submit, join the group and participate in the teams that we have available. All right, is the Army Corps of Engineers standard available for download? I'm really plugging the National CAD Standard, but yes, if you want to email me, I can send you the link to the Army Corps of Engineers standard. Is there a source for allowing CAD editors to construct National CAD Standard layers using pull-down menus as they're working on a drawing? I'm sure there is. I know within the Corps of Engineers we created templates and tools, and you can also download those from our site that you can use, or you could create your own. I'm sure there's a lot of great programmers on this call that could create their own tools or that can do what Eric is saying. So what I'm hearing, Carl has a good question. So what I'm hearing is that the standard is not actually a standard, but a suggestion for you to go out and change. I would say yes, that is true to a point. There are going, if you have, say, you need to use a layer for a wall full exterior, then the NCS does lock you in to what layer you have to use. But now, if you have to create your own, it's not going to be that specific. You're going to have to create whatever you need to create your own drawings, because granted, we agree that the NCS is not all-inclusive, and I'll agree that the Army Corps of Engineers standard is not all-inclusive. There's just no way we could cover everything that could possibly be in the standard. Carl is saying, can you validate this as being an actual standard? Yes, it is an actual standard. And again, if you look through the National CAD Standard, it is very specific on how you lay out particular things in drawings. So if you are following a contract that does say follow the National CAD Standard, if you deviate from those items, you are not going to be compliant with the standard. Okay, Steve says the Canadian federal government has a CAD standard available, but many users default to National CAD Standard. So yeah, you're probably going to see that not only in the US, but Canada and also worldwide. Because my point is, hey, there's a standard out there, I'm going to use it. I'd rather just piggyback on someone else's than have to recreate the wheel. Why not? Devin asked, is the Army Corps templates, are they available for download? Yes. Are the NCS symbols 2D or 3D? The ones that you have available off of the National CAD Standard site, they are 2D symbols. Okay, I know we're getting close to time being up, so I'm going to jump back into the slides and go on to the next one. Again, I said if you want to get involved, go to the U.S. National CAD Standard website, and the web address is here. And there's a link on here where you can join a project committee. The only requirement is that you do have to own the National CAD Standard version 6. But again, we would love to have your participation in this. Okay, again, it was mentioned that if you're interested in purchasing the National CAD Standard version 6, there is a 10% discount code that's available through March the 9th. So again, I mentioned some of the pricing that's available. This is a great way to save 10% off of that price. So for more information, not only on the National CAD Standard, but I guess also to other things that the National Institute of Building Sciences and its contributors are involved in, I would visit the nationalcadstandard.org site, and there's other links to other things, and there's articles on the National CAD Standard and things like that. So I appreciate your time. I hope I've addressed your concerns or questions, and I will turn things back over to Rob.
Fantastic. Again, thank you very much, Stephen, for your time today, and thank you to you, the participants, for your interest in and support of the National CAD Standard. We do hope you enjoyed today's presentation. We do also appreciate your feedback, and please have a great day.